Welcome to another episode of Raising Them Up,
our Christian parenting Q&A podcast, and we're your hosts.
I'm Israel Wayne.
And I'm Brook Wayne.
Welcome to another episode of the Raising Them Up Parenting Q&A podcast, where we answer your parenting questions. And we would love to hear from you. In fact, if you've got a question that you would like to have answered on a future episode, you can submit your question a few different ways. One is by going to the website for this podcast, which is raisingthemup.org, or you can call a toll-free number, 1-800-223-6567, 1-800-223-6567, leave a voicemail, or you can email it to raisingthemup@generations.org, raisingthemup@generations.org. So our first question that we have for today's episode is a kind of unusual one.
It is, yeah.
Go ahead and let's start off with this one.
Okay, so the question is, what are your thoughts on superheroes?
Well, I'm assuming that this is a mom of boys.
Oh, probably.
And I think before we can answer the question about superheroes, we have to kind of back up and get the 30,000-foot view and talk about what it is that superheroes represent. And so underneath the topic of superheroes is the topic of heroism and being heroic. And so the question is there a biblical theology of heroism? And I would say yes. In fact, I would say the Bible is all for it. All the way through the Bible, the stories are filled with heroes. And a lot of them are heroes that didn't seem to be heroes, right? They were unlikely heroes. So Moses, of course, the great deliverer of God's people in Egypt, he's a guy who ends up herding sheep for 40 years on the backside of the wilderness. Or you have Gideon, who is this great leader of an army and brings God's deliverance. And yet, what is Gideon known for? Being the least of his family, the least in his tribe, in a small persecuted country, and yet God uses him. And you have over and over throughout the Bible these great heroes, King David, who was a shepherd boy. And so the Bible seems to give us these stories over and over of people who didn't seem likely to accomplish something great, but then they did. I mean, even Jesus' mother, Mary, just a very common, ordinary young woman who is chosen by God and gets a message from an angel to be the one who's going to deliver the Messiah. So there's lots of heroes in the Bible. And the Bible is what's called the meta-narrative. It's the overstory on which all other stories are based. And so if you study great literature, you'll see that there's always a plot that gets followed in every significant classic, in every kind of major movie or story, that there's a plot. And God has chosen to bring deliverance throughout history through heroes. And he's done it even past Bible times. We have great heroes like William Wilberforce, this godly Christian man who helped to end the slave trade. And we could go on and look at great heroes of the faith, and William Tyndale, who helped translate the Bible into English and paid for it with his life. But there's something about young men, that young men really want to be heroes. They desire to be heroes. Now, sociologically, we're in the middle of a crisis right now because young men, 25 years old and under, are more disenfranchised than they have ever been in American history. They feel lost. They typically don't have friends. They don't know how to make relationships. They don't know how to have a life plan.
Yeah.
And so many of them are feeling very lost. They're the most depressed, the most suicidal generation of young men in the history of the United States. And so these young men still have this God-given innate desire to be heroes.
Right.
And so what do? They turn to video games where they get to be a virtual hero, or they turn to movies where they can watch a movie, but in their own mind, they kind of put themselves in that role as the character who is the protagonist in the movie, the the hero who comes and saves the day. And they're living vicariously through avatars and through these virtual realities, if you will. And there's a problem with that because these young men aren't actually doing anything heroic, and they know it.
See, I was like, okay, like we're talking about Bible heroes and the people of faith, and like, okay, yeah, I'm all in. But when we got talking about all the violence that's in some of the movies in this era with superheroes, I go, oh, I don't want my young men getting involved in that.
Well, so when you think about the cartoon characters and the movie characters of superheroes, and I have to run a disclaimer, I'm not an aficionado on comic books or on superheroes, right? So people will probably write in and they'll say, Israel doesn't know what he's talking about, but this is my understanding of it. There's different kinds of superheroes in those stories. So you have Marvel, which is, of course, one of the big comic book universes, and then DC, which is a competitor, and there's others. But some of those characters are characters that people, especially young men, really identify with. And some of them particularly are underdogs. So Spider-Man, for example, Peter Parker is this ordinary high school young person who is bullied and who has had a rough upbringing. And if I remember right, I think his parents were killed, and, he's living with his aunt, I think. And, he doesn't grow up in privilege, put it that way. But something happens to him where he gets bitten by this radioactive spider, and now all of a sudden he has a superpower, and he can make spider webs and climb up walls, and all it gives him an advantage. And so he decides that he wants to use it for good and to try to defeat bad guys. And so the plot is one that a lot of young men identify with, that, hey, I'm this ordinary, awkward, geeky kind of person, and what if something happens to me and I can somehow transcend this and become a hero? And they identify with Peter Parker, and they love that idea of them becoming Spider-Man. And I think for a lot of them, they do put themselves in that character. They want to be that heroic character. Now, there's others that are mutants. And so they have something that happens to them genetically. There's a mutation that causes them to just be different than everybody else. And so again, because of the mutations and so forth, they can be outcasts in society. And so some of those characters, these X-Men and so forth, they are looked down upon by society. And so again, a lot of reclusive young men identify with those characters, and they feel like, I feel like that too. I'm not socially accepted, and I'm kind of different and awkward and so forth. There are others who are heroes because somehow they're just innately wealthy. They have millions of dollars or billions of dollars, like Batman, for example. He has kind of a rough upbringing, but then he ends up being born into a wealthy family. And so he just is able to be a hero because he can just buy tech, basically. Or Iron Man is a similar character. He's got just billions and billions of dollars, and he can create these suits that enable him to do something heroic. And in one sense, I'm not sure how they become heroes in the minds of young men, because like the gap is too big. I don't know. It's like either something accidentally has to happen to you, like you get bitten by a radioactive spider, or you have to somehow fall into billions of dollars. I think it's probably more likely that something freakish happens to you than that you fall into billions of dollars. But at any rate, I think there's this sense of dreaming and desiring. And from my viewpoint, I think the concept is somewhat on the right track. I just think that what we should probably encourage, other than the fanciful, outside the realm of possibility that you're going to become a mutant or that you're going to be bitten by a radioactive spider or fall into billions of dollars, is probably real heroism, which means that ordinary, everyday people show up and do important things. Even if that's just going to your job, even if that is just getting married and having children and loving your family.
Right. See, I think that'd be a concern for me if you have this superhero movies and stories for your young people, especially the young men. How do they then realize, wait, the real value, the real heroism is in some very ordinary seeming things of where you're laying your life down for others.
Yeah, not just saving the world from alien invasion.
I mean, sometimes it's like saving money for buying a house so you can build a family. Like, You know,
Yeah.
I used to talk with our young men when we were redoing our house that one of the best things in the world is drywall, and they laughed at me, and I'm like, really, you young men need to be saving your pennies and your dollars for drywall. And they're looking at me like, and what's your catch, Mom? Because I don't usually tease them a lot. And the fact is, I wanted to instill in them this heart, and I talked with them about it, of the drywall and building a home is where you're going to have the real life happen. So what would you say about that seeming disconnect to me of the superhero in the story and they're accomplishing, these heroic things that are kind of really outside of the ordinary, in helping our young men understand that real heroism is in sometimes a very quiet sort of life of working with their own hands and following what the Lord has for them?
Well, I think there are several things. I think it is good to inspire the imagination, and we can probably do that better with actual heroes of history. And so like on our familyrenewal.org web store, we actually sell a lot of Christian biographies. And so you can read great books of heroes like Brother Andrew, or of Jim Elliot, or the Chariots of Fire guy.
Eric Liddell.
Eric Liddell. Yeah, those guys. And so you can read these stories of great heroes, men and women of the faith, Corrie ten Boom, etc., who do great heroic things. There's also classic literature, and I know Generations, who's the producer of this show, they have a lot of classic books that they have published that have heroes that are good role models and that reflect a Christian worldview. And so I think we can point our children towards the mighty men of the Bible, David's mighty men, people who did these heroic exploits, but in the service of God. And I think we can point to the heroes of the Bible, heroes of history, heroes in classic literature that are truly heroic. I think one of the downsides that I see within the new Marvel movies or within the cartoon world is some of these heroes are not actually heroes. They're actually bad guys, in terms of their ethics and in terms of their morals. And then in the movies, it's very difficult because Hollywood always has an agenda. And so they're always trying to slip in sexuality. There's a lot of profanity, taking the Lord's name in vain. There's a lot of things that are truly not heroic, and are not things that we want to encourage in our children. So I would say that we do want to promote heroism, but I think we have to be very careful in terms of the heroes that we put before our children, and some of these so-called heroes, Wolverine and so ever, that they're not really heroes. They're not good guys, and they're not doing good things. Many of them are assassins and killers, and those aren't the people we want our children to be emulating.
Yeah. So quick, in my mind, what would you take as far as helping a youngster go from just living in this fantasy world, and maybe even the little boy who wants to wear the cape around and rush around the yard with his pretend sword and so forth, to how do you go from that transition from that to helping them see heroism is really following the Lord and doing what is right?
Well, in one sense, I'm not going to be too hard on the little boy with the cape running around the yard. I think boys need to be able to kind of dream and to imagine themselves being heroes. I don't think there's a big problem with that. But service, I think, is one of the ways that you help them to actually do something heroic. When you go help your neighbor, or you help grandma rake her leaves, or you go serve in your church, you're doing something that's actually fulfilling the purpose for which God's placed you here on the earth, which is loving your neighbor and serving people in Christ's name. And I think that in those small ways, they begin to see that they actually have a part that they can play and they can contribute. And so I would encourage parents to encourage heroism, but to direct it into something that's much more positive.
So this next question has to do with what to do with finished homeschool books. I'm assuming this means workbooks. For those of you who homeschool, what do you do with all the work after a child graduates? My oldest two just want to trash it all. But as a mom, I'm finding myself emotional about it. If I'm honest, I have 18 years full of totes and artwork and workbooks and everything else you can think of. And I was like, oh, wow, I have some thoughts about this because I tend to like to save things, the first drawing of a little child and all. And yet for us, we have 11 children. It's just like there's no way to keep all of that. So I have a couple thoughts. I was actually homeschooled in the 80s, and my mom saved a lot of things. Not everything, but there were quite a few things. And as my children became of student age, she started giving us books that we had done. Not so much the workbook stuff, but the textbooks. But as time went by, some of those textbooks were really outdated and old, and so many more things have come out. There's so much more curriculums that's really designed for the homeschool family now with a Christian perspective. And so some of that I ended up not using. There were some great gems in there that she had saved that we used. So as far as saving the books, I tend to go for more of the classics or some of the really valuable books that we would have used. And then the textbooks are a little bit of a mixed bag. I'm saving some for our future grandchildren, but some of them.
So many are updated now.
They're updated. And
so to have something that's 30 years old, the information is kind of outdated. And
or like the history drops off in, 1990s somewhere.
Ronald Reagan is president or something. Yeah.
Or the pictures are just not as great quality. So a lot of those things I think are changed. But as far as the workbooks, to be honest, we've tended to throw out a lot. Now,
I don't like the ones with my handwriting because it's like, I don't want my kids to know how bad my handwriting was.
You did have really bad handwriting.
Actually, still do, but
yeah, you still do.
Not as bad as I did.
That's true.
If you can imagine that.
But that's one of the things I do tend to save, just like a snapshot, maybe even a picture of some of our children's first work, just because it's so cute, and all the letters are really large. Our little 4-year-old's just starting to write her name, and I want to capture that memory and be able to show her children someday. But I don't need everything. I really just need a snapshot from each era, and so that's what I'm personally doing, is saving a little bit. I did come across our guy who just graduated this year, his workbook from history. And I mean, it was so cute because he was really doing it to keep up with the big brothers and sisters while we were all doing it. And that brought just a little heart memory for me. I'm like, I remember this. And he worked so hard at his first workbook there in second grade related to history. So I did want to keep that one. Some of the ones that have to do with big thoughts where they've actually written a bit of an essay or their own personal thoughts, like your Foundations in Faith would be definitely one I want them to save. Consumer Math, I want them to save that because it's got a lot of information they may refer back to. And Worldviews and Conflict. Those are some of my major 3. I'm actually saving those workbooks because I want them to go back and remember what ideas they sorted through in that season. So I think this is one, though, that has to do with different states. It's really important to consider your own state's homeschool laws in this sort of situation because you may find helpful information that you do need to keep records, even maybe for a certain amount of time, just to be able to document that you have been homeschooling and perhaps over many subjects and so forth to show completion.
So one way to find out the homeschooling laws in your state is to, of course, visit hslda.org, Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and of course they can tell you your specific state homeschool laws. But also, it's really helpful to visit your state homeschool association, and almost every state has one. Right. You can find those through a website called homeschoolfreedom.com. There's a map there. Go find your state, and then get connected to your state. Sign up on their email list, become a member. Most have annual paid membership. And oftentimes, too, with a paid membership to your state homeschool association, you actually can access certain benefits. And sometimes states offer like free transcript services. HSLDA, I believe, does that for their members as well. And so particularly when you're talking about high school, sometimes it's more important to save those materials because you have to prove and demonstrate for employment, for college, whatever, that you have done the work.
Right.
Second grade, not so much, but high school transcripts are actually more important than the workbooks, right?
I would say so, yes. That's the one piece of information you're going to have, like the collected grade and all that's in there, what's completed. And, I know this is a little bit like differing for each family and different children, but I really do recommend doing your best to finish every single book, especially the main core subjects.
I didn't really do that. Which is part of why I don't want my books hanging around for my kids. Dad, how come you only got 3/4 of the way through this one?
But especially with the core subjects, I find it super important to be able to actually have finished those. I know there's different states that require all kinds of documentation that needs turned into a supervisor or a state overseer to show that the child did all of this work. And I think, wow, that's a lot of work to keep up with. And yet that would be a really good time to realize, okay, for so many years, I probably do need to save all of this finished work.
But the other thing is, in terms of just general record keeping, I think there's benefit in saving information in the cloud, if you will,
Yeah.
rather than having physical copies of everything. Because most of us, we have limited living space and storage space. And so if we just need to show a representation that they did this book in ninth grade and they did page 100 and 200 and 300, and we can probably take some photos, put it in like Google Drive, Google Keep, something like that,
Right.
or some other form of online storage, Dropbox or something, and have a record of the material. And some of that could actually work for the nostalgic, like a mom having this memory of the 4-year-old who drew the picture. I mean, you can actually take a photo of some of those
Yes.
papers that hung on your refrigerator for months and months, and then just, recycle those things. And so a lot of those workbooks really can be paper recycled, and they don't have to be stored indefinitely. Again, check the laws in your state, but I would say that if possible, leaner is better when it comes to just storing piles of
Right,
things.
because there's a lot to sort through later on in life. And, a lot of times we are so eager as parents to be like, oh, now they're married and now they have a little child of their own. I bet they want to have that third grade special
They're not
memory.
going to use whatever we think they should use.
They don't.
They won't.
Tend to
That's
see that
just
as the
not how
value
that
at that
works
point.
out. They're going to have some curriculum that they like that's probably new on the market, the hottest, hippest new thing,
Perhaps.
which is okay.
Yeah, that's okay. But I'm just saying, as far as the workbooks, they're not really eager to show off to their bride that they finished third grade.
I mean, there are some things that I think can be, passed down. Certain, like you said, certain kinds of textbooks and things like that have more of a timeless nature to them. But for the most part, my view is be a minimalist when it comes to that type of thing.
And so, of course, I think one of the areas best to keep with each grade level for at least a season or two is the tests in the back, the completed tests, or, some of those final works at the end of the final exams, the essays, their writings. I would be more inclined to write because that's something coming from inside of them. So those are some things. But again, check your laws, because if you have testing in your state and that proves your child passed second grade, that's probably going to be more valuable that they have that test has been taken than to have actually the paperwork.
Yeah, so a great place to learn more about homeschooling and all this kind of nitty-gritty, practical detail stuff on homeschooling is Answers for Homeschooling, the top 25 questions critics ask. This is a book that I've written, and it's available for sale at generations.org. If you go to their web store and you type in my name, Israel Wayne, there'll be a list of all the books that I've written that have come up, and you can purchase those at the generations.org web store.
So our next question has to do with trans kids. And the mom wrote, I wish I didn't have to ask advice for this, but here we are. My son, 11, plays with all the children in the neighborhood, and there's a female child that is now claiming to be a boy. I do not want to be cruel to the child, but we do not support this delusion. My son understands that this is a problem. I want to handle this biblically and gently. And I also imagine that there may be a time that we will have to discuss this position with the child's parents.
Yes, this is one of those parenting questions that people weren't asking 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for parents like us who grew up in an era when this just wasn't a thing. I didn't know any trans kids when I was growing up. It wasn't something that we were confronted with. And so in the 1980s. And so this is a challenge, but increasingly it's becoming common to where our kids are meeting people who identify as the opposite gender and are confused about their sexuality. So I think there's a few things. I think, first of all, we as parents need to be clear in our own mind on the biblical position for these issues. And there's a couple of books that we sell at our familyrenewal.org web store. And so if you go to familyrenewal.org/store, one of the books I'd encourage you to look for is one called Who Am I? Solving the Identity Puzzle. This is by Martin Iles from Australia. He's a former CEO at Answers in Genesis. This book deals with finding our identity in Christ, but it also really helps to unpack that whole sexual identity issue. It's great for teenagers. If you have teenagers, please get them this book and have them read it. Another book that's great for teenagers is this one, Quick Answers to Social Issues by Brian Osborne, and he's on staff with Answers in Genesis. And there's a whole section in here on sexuality. And I would encourage you to get this for your teenager as well. But I think even as parents, if you get these books, they will be helpful for you in developing the vocabulary that you need to be able to speak about these things intelligently and biblically with your children. And yes, we do want to be compassionate. We realize that every person is a human soul. They are made in God's image, and yet we can't compromise on truth in an attempt to make them feel better about themselves. The best way to help someone is to present the truth in love, which is what the scripture points us to.
That's really hard, though, when it's like all the, maybe for years these children have grown up together, and now one of them is making all these things. And that's where, there's a kind of a dividing time that happens. I would have said a little older than this, maybe 12, 13, but even 10, 11, where the influences of the world are starting to shape youngsters. And so that playtime becomes a lot less free, and it becomes more about identity, really. And so, like Israel said, these two books are just laden with all kinds of Bible verses that we as parents need to have inside of us.
Right.
And, it's 2 pages at a time. Took a long time. But I think that's so helpful, even when it's not the questions they're asking, to go ahead and delve into these topics. We always want to be age appropriate, right? But by and large, I hear again and again, we need to have these conversations with our children before the world does. And it's like, well, we're homeschooled. We shelter our children in a reasonable way. And yet it's like it's filtered through, the world's influence is filtered through so many ways. And we do need to be getting to those conversations first.
Oftentimes, sin can be normalized on the basis of, I like this other person or this child or this teenager. I like them and they're cool.
Yeah.
And they embrace this false belief. So this false belief must not be that bad because my friend embraces it and they're cool. And so I would really hesitate having our children be in close friendship with someone who is identifying as trans. And we can be nice to them. They can be our neighbors. We can be kind. We can show love, but we're not going to have dozens of hours of alone time spent with our child and this trans kid, because most likely our child will probably be influenced in a negative way by that worldview. So we encourage you to pick up these resources. Again, our website is familyrenewal.org/store. Also, we would encourage you to visit generations.org. They are the producer of this podcast. They have a lot of great resources for the family, including homeschool curriculum. So please check out generations.org. If you go to their web store, type in my name, Israel Wayne, and you can see the list of books that they carry that I've written. If you're interested in having us speak at an upcoming event that you're hosting, my website is israelwayne.com, and you can see topics and things that I speak about. And my wife, Brooke, is also available to speak at women's events. And we speak together, sometimes on marriage. Our ministry website is familyrenewal.org. And we would love to have you share this podcast with your friends. Tell them about it. Make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure that the networks that you're a part of at church, your homeschool group, wherever, Christian parents that you're friends with, that they know about the Raising Them Up podcast. Until next time, thank you and God bless.
This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.